He had one rule when he left this town 8 years ago: never come back. Not for holidays, not for reunions, not even for his own father's retirement party. Ethan Cole had built an entire life out of staying away from Maple Hollow, and it had worked. Right up until the phone call that told him his father's heart wasn't just tired anymore. It was failing, and there wasn't much time left to make things right. So he came back for one Christmas. Just one. Enough to say the things he should have said years ago. Enough to sit by a hospital bed and be a son again. And then he would leave the way he always did. Quietly. Before the town could ask him to stay. He didn't plan on seeing her. He definitely didn't plan on falling for her twice. Because the moment Ethan Cole walked back into Maple, Hollow's snow-dusted town square, the first person he saw was Grace Whitman, running the very Christmas market she'd once begged him to stay and help her build the same Christmas market he'd walked away from, along with her, the night he left 8 years ago without so much as a goodbye. One Christmas, that was the plan. Grace Whitman was about to make sure it became a lot harder to leave. Ethan, for his part, had built a career in Chicago as an architect. Methodical and controlled, restoring old buildings with the same precision he wished he'd been able to apply to himself the year his mother died. He didn't date seriously. He told himself he was too busy. The truth, which he rarely let himself examine, was that he had never stopped comparing every person he met to a version of Grace that existed permanently in the last moment he saw her, standing on her porch in the rain, asking him to please just talk to her, and him getting in the car anyway. His father's heart attack changed the calculation. Walter Cole had always been the reason. Ethan felt guilty about leaving and the reason he never found a way to come back. A proud, quiet man who'd never once asked his son to explain himself, which somehow made the distance between them worse, not better. When the hospital called, Ethan didn't think. He booked a flight, packed a bag for 4 days, and told himself this was about his father. Only his father. He would see him, help however he could, and leave before the Christmas market opened, before the whole town could look at him the way he knew they would, like the boy who broke Grace Whitman's heart and never once looked back. He made it exactly 1 day before he saw her. "Ethan Cole," Grace said, standing behind a table of hand-poured candles at the market's opening setup, her breath fogging in the cold air, her voice carrying the particular flatness of someone determined not to let a decade-old wound show. "I didn't know dead men could walk." Grace. It was all he could manage. 8 years and the sound of her voice still landed somewhere in his chest. He hadn't fully mapped. "How long are you back for?" The question had an edge to it, sharpened by every unanswered text message she'd sent in the first year after he left, all of which had gone unread or at least unanswered. Just through Christmas. "My dad, his heart. It's not good." Something in her face shifted, softened despite herself. Whatever else Grace Whitman felt about Ethan Cole, she had loved Walter like a second father for the 15 years she'd been in and out of that house. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "Is he at Maple Hollow General?" "Room 214. I'll bring him a poinsettia." She said it briskly, already turning back to her candles, the conversation closing as efficiently as it had opened. "Don't worry. I won't stay long enough to make it weird." He watched her walk away and understood. With the sinking clarity of a man realizing a plan has already failed, that one Christmas was not going to be nearly enough time to sort out everything he'd left unresolved in this town. Walter Cole, propped up in his hospital bed looking smaller than Ethan remembered, had one request once the initial relief of seeing his son wore off: help Grace finish setting up the market. His heart condition meant he couldn't do his usual volunteer shift, building the market's wooden stalls, and the market opened in 6 days. and Grace was down 2 volunteers and refusing. Out of stubbornness, Walter clearly found both maddening and endearing. To ask for help from anyone who might tell her she couldn't handle it alone. "I'm not asking you to fix things with her," Walter said. His voice thin, but his eyes sharp in the way they always got, when he meant something completely. "I'm asking you to put up some stalls. What you do with the rest is your business. But son, you're going to be in this town for 6 more days either way. You might as well do something useful with them. Instead of hiding at my kitchen table, feeling sorry for yourself." So Ethan showed up at the town square the next morning with a toolbox he hadn't touched in years and an offer Grace clearly wanted to refuse and couldn't. Not with the market 6 days from opening and her volunteer list a person short. "This doesn't mean anything," she said, handing him a level and a stack of lumber with more force than necessary. "I know," he said. "I mean it. You're helping because your dad asked. Not because we're whatever you think we might be starting up again." "Grace, I know." And he did know. Or told himself he did. Right up until the 3rd day, when he watched her climb a ladder to string lights across the market's main arch and instinctively reached out to steady it the way he used to, and she looked down at him with an expression that had nothing guarded in it at all. Just for a second, before the wall came back up. They worked together through the week the way people do when they're avoiding a much larger conversation, by focusing intensely on smaller tasks. Hanging string lights, setting up the hot cocoa stand, fixing the crooked sign on Grace's grandmother's old general store. In the process, the conversation neither of them wanted to have started happening anyway, in pieces, the way real reckonings usually do. "Why didn't you ever call?" Grace asked one evening, the 2 of them alone in the store after closing, hanging the last of the wreaths. It wasn't really a question. It had the flat cadence of something she'd rehearsed in her head for 8 years. "Because I didn't know how to explain it in a way that didn't sound like an excuse," Ethan said. "My mom died and I stopped being able to picture a future. Any future. Not with you, not with anyone, not even with myself, really. And I knew if I called you, you'd ask me to talk about it. And I didn't have the words yet. So I just ran. I know that's not a real answer. I know it doesn't undo 8 years. "No," Grace agreed quietly. "It doesn't." But she didn't say it with the same flatness as before. And something in the room shifted, the way a held breath finally releases. "I think about that night a lot," Ethan admitted. "You standing on the porch in the rain asking me to just talk to you. I've had 8 years to figure out what I should have said. And the honest answer is I still don't fully know. I just know leaving was the wrong choice. It was the easy choice and it was wrong." Grace was quiet for a long moment, twisting a piece of ribbon between her fingers. "I built this whole market partly to prove to myself I didn't need you to have a good life," she said. "And I don't. I built something real here, Ethan, with or without you. But I'd be lying if I said, some part of me hasn't been waiting 8 years for you to say exactly what you just said." There was a night, 4 days before Christmas, when the market hosted its annual tree lighting rehearsal, and Ethan found himself standing beside Grace's younger brother, Sam, now a broad-shouldered 19-year-old who'd been 11 the last time Ethan saw him. Sam looked at him with the open suspicion of someone who'd grown up, hearing his sister's version of the story, filtered through years of late-night conversations he wasn't supposed to have overheard. "You know she cried for like a year, right?" Sam said, not unkindly, just factually. The way teenagers deliver devastating truths without quite understanding their own weight. Mom used to think she'd never really date anyone again. Then Colin came along and everyone got hopeful, and then that fizzled too. And I always figured it was because some part of her was still waiting on you. Which honestly kind of sucks for the rest of us who had to watch it. "I know I hurt her," Ethan said carefully. "I'm not here to pretend otherwise. I'm not trying to warn you off or whatever, Sam said, shrugging. I'm just saying, if you're going to disappear again, do it now, before Christmas. Not after she lets herself hope. Again, he walked off, toward the hot cocoa stand before Ethan could respond, leaving the words to settle uncomfortably in his chest for the rest of the night. It was Walter, 3 days later, who finally coaxed the weight of that conversation out of him. You're carrying something, his father said, watching Ethan pace the small hospital room instead of sitting in the visitor's chair like he had every other evening. Spit it out. Sam basically told me I should leave before I get her hopes up again, Ethan admitted. And the thing is, I don't think he's wrong to worry. I left once already. Why would either of them believe this time is different? Walter was quiet for a moment, adjusting the blanket over his knees with hands that shook slightly, more than they used to. Because words don't prove anything, son. Time does. You can't undo 8 years of absence with 1 good week of hanging string lights, no matter how much you mean it. If you're serious about her, you're going to have to prove it the slow way. The same way trust always gets rebuilt. Show up. Keep showing up. Let the proof be in what you actually do, not what you say under the mistletoe. It was that conversation, more than any grand romantic gesture, that changed how Ethan approached the remaining days before Christmas. He stopped trying to say the perfect thing to Grace and instead simply kept showing up, fixing the store's back door that had been sticking for 2 winters, driving Sam to his shift at the hardware store when his car wouldn't start, sitting with Walter through a difficult night when his heart rate spiked and the whole family gathered at the hospital until morning. Grace watched all of it from a careful distance, saying little, but something in her posture around him began, slowly, to soften. The near kiss happened 3 nights before Christmas. In the store, surrounded by candles Grace had made herself, the 2 of them close enough that neither one was pretending any more that this was just about helping with the market. Ethan reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, the same gesture he used to do 100 times a day when they were 22 and certain of everything. And for a moment, the 8 years between them simply weren't there. Then Grace's phone buzzed. It was Colin, the man she'd dated after Ethan left, the one who'd never quite stopped hoping she'd give him another chance, texting to ask if she wanted to get dinner before his shift at the fire station. The moment broke, and with it came the complication that threatens to end things right before the climax. Ethan's flight back to Chicago was booked for December 26th. His firm had a major restoration project breaking ground in January that he'd spent 2 years fighting to lead. Staying in Maple Hollow wasn't just sentimental. It meant walking away from the career he'd spent 8 years building to replace, the life he lost when he left. You're leaving again, Grace said. Not a question, when he told her about the flight, the old hurt rising to the surface so fast it startled both of them. Of course you are. I don't know why I let myself believe 6 days of hanging. Christmas lights meant something different this time. Grace, it's not the same as before. I have a responsibility to this project, people counting on me. You had a responsibility to me once too, she said, and walked away before he could answer, leaving him standing alone among her handmade candles with the distinct, sickening feeling of watching himself repeat the exact mistake he'd spent 8 years regretting. Ethan spent Christmas Eve morning at his father's bedside, turning the decision over in his mind while Walter, propped against his pillows, watched him with the patient exasperation of a man who'd clearly seen this particular expression on his son's face before. You're doing the thing again, Walter said. What thing? The thing where you decide what you want by figuring out what's safest instead of what's true. You did it with your mother's death. You're doing it now with this project in Chicago. Walter's voice was weak but unwavering. Son, I've got maybe a few good years left in this heart. If I'm lucky, and I'm not spending any of them watching you choose safe over real a second time. That girl has been the realest thing in your life since you were 17 years old. The project will still be there in some form. She won't wait a third time, and honestly, she shouldn't have to. Ethan sat with that for a long time after his father drifted off to sleep. Then he called his firm's managing partner and, for the first time in 8 years, said the words he'd never once let himself consider. He wanted to open a satellite office. Restoration work, historic preservation, Maple Hollow, had no shortage of aging buildings that could use exactly his kind of expertise. And his firm had been talking about regional expansion for over a year. It wasn't giving up the project. It was building a version of his career that didn't require abandoning everything else that mattered to make room for it. He found Grace on Christmas Eve at the market's closing ceremony, the town square glowing with the string lights they'd hung together. Her grandmother's store lit up warm and gold behind her, snow beginning to fall in the kind of soft, deliberate way that felt almost staged, if it hadn't been so entirely real. "I'm not getting on that flight tomorrow," he said, before she could brace herself against whatever she assumed he was about to say. "I talked to my firm. I'm opening a satellite office here, historic restoration, which honestly, half this town's buildings desperately need. I'm not running from Chicago. I'm choosing Maple Hollow. I'm choosing to stop running from anything, actually. Including you." Grace stared at him, snow catching in her hair. Her carefully guarded expression finally fully breaking open. "You can't just say something like that in front of the entire Christmas market." "Ethan Cole." "I think I just did." He stepped closer. Close enough that the 8 years of distance between them had nowhere left to hide. "I know I don't deserve an easy yes. I know 8 years doesn't undo itself because I said the right thing on a Tuesday in December. But I'm asking anyway. Let me stay. Let me prove it wasn't just words this time." Grace didn't answer with words at all. She kissed him, right there in the middle of the town square. String lights glowing overhead. The whole town of Maple Hollow, including Walter, wheeled outside in a blanket against doctor's orders, because he refused to miss this. Watching the two people, everyone had quietly hoped would find their way back to each other, finally actually do it. "For the record," Grace said, laughing against his mouth, "I'm still furious about the 8 years." "I know," Ethan said. "I've got the rest of my life to make up for it. Starting tonight." Colin found them a few minutes later, standing near the hot cocoa stand with the easy grace of a man who'd clearly already guessed how this particular Christmas was going to end. He extended a hand to Ethan, who shook it, bracing for something colder than what actually came. "Take care of her," Colin said simply. "I mean that. She deserves someone who's actually going to stay." There was no bitterness in it, only the quiet dignity of a good man, stepping aside for something he recognized was never really his to keep. Grace hugged him, murmuring a thank you that carried 8 years of complicated gratitude in it, and Colin disappeared back into the crowd with a small, genuine smile, already being pulled toward the hot cocoa line by a group of volunteer firefighters ribbing him about something unrelated. It was, Grace would say later, exactly the kind of clean small-town ending Colin deserved. No drama, just grace, the actual kind. Extended freely. Sam appeared next, arms crossed, doing his best. Impression of a protective younger brother despite standing a full head taller than Ethan. "So you're staying," he said. Half a question, half a warning. "I'm staying," Ethan confirmed. "Good." Sam's stern expression cracked into something more like relief. "Because I already told half the hardware store you were sticking around to help with the depot renovation. Would have been pretty embarrassing to walk that back." Even Walter, bundled in blankets, nearby with a cup of decaf hot, Coco he wasn't technically supposed to have allowed himself a small, satisfied smile, the particular expression of a father who has spent months worrying about his son finally watching that worry resolve itself in real time in the middle of a town square. Under lights his son had helped hang with his own two hands. By the following Christmas, the satellite office was thriving, restoring 3 of Maple Hollow's oldest buildings, including, at Grace's insistence, the old train depot that had sat abandoned since before either of them were born. Walter's heart had stabilized enough for him to walk Grace down the aisle at their wedding that spring, standing in for the father Grace had lost years earlier. Both men equally proud in a way neither bothered pretending not to be emotional about. And every December since, when the Christmas market opens on the town green, there's a new tradition alongside the hot cocoa and the string lights. Ethan Cole, hanging the very first strand of lights on the market's main arch, exactly the way he did the December. He came home meaning to stay for one Christmas, and stayed instead for the rest of his life. And